In the heart of the land, where the sun kissed the earth and the rivers sang songs of the past, there was a village called Ajase. It was a prosperous place, filled with farmers, traders, and warriors. The people of Ajase were known for their unity, their strength, and their traditions. Among them was a boy named David. David was born into a respected family, the only son of his parents, who had prayed for a child for many years. When he finally arrived, his mother rejoiced, and his father declared, "This child will be a great man." And for a time, it seemed true. David grew into a hard-working and kind-hearted young boy. Even as a child, he showed signs of strength, helping his father carry small bundles of firewood and assisting his mother with household chores. His sharp, intelligent eyes and quiet determination made him stand out among the other children. Many mothers in Ajase wished their daughters would marry him one day, but the gods had other plans. When David reached 13 years old, his body began to change. His voice deepened, his frame became lean and athletic, and his strength was becoming apparent. He could lift heavier loads than the other boys his age, and the elders praised him, saying, "This one will grow into a fine man." But soon, something unusual began to reveal itself. His manhood was abnormally large. At first, David thought little of it. Perhaps it was normal, perhaps it was just part of growing up. But as he continued to grow older, the whispers began. "David is different," the village boys murmured behind his back. "He is not like us," the young men said, exchanging nervous glances whenever they bathed together in the river. "How can a woman accept such a man?" the older women whispered. David could feel the eyes on him, the quiet stares that turned into loud whispers as he passed. But he pushed the thoughts aside and focused on helping his family, hoping the rumors would fade. By the time David was 18, he was the most handsome and hard-working young man in Ajase. His once lean frame had grown into a powerful and muscular body, and many girls admired him from afar, hoping he would choose one of them as his bride. And then came Adora. She was beautiful, with skin like cocoa and a laugh like a flowing river. She and David had grown up together, playing under the mango trees as children. Now, as adults, David wanted her to be his wife. He courted her properly, bringing her gifts of woven baskets, carved wooden figures, and sweet fruits from the forest. Adora's family approved, and soon a wedding was planned. But on the night when they were finally alone together, everything changed. David touched her gently, whispering words of love. But when she saw his naked body, fear filled her eyes. "David, no, I cannot," she stammered, stepping away. David's heart pounded. "Why?" he asked, his voice breaking. Tears welled in her eyes. "It is too much. It will hurt me. I cannot be your wife," she cried. And before he could stop her, she ran out into the night. The next morning, the whole village knew. David walked through Ajase, feeling the weight of 1,000 eyes on him. "Did you hear? Adora ran away. She said he is a monster. No woman will ever accept him now." Slowly, David became an outcast. The women avoided him. The men pitied him. Even his friends grew distant, unsure of what to say. His once bright future turned to dust before his eyes. David tried again. He courted another woman, Nkem, a strong and fearless warrior's daughter. But when the same thing happened, the village laughed at him openly. "A man who cannot take a wife is not a man at all," the elders muttered. "What is the use of his strength if he will never have children?" The women scoffed. David stopped trying. He spent his days working in the fields, his muscles rippling under the sun, his heart growing heavier with each passing year. At night, he sat alone by the river, listening to the crickets sing. He watched his friends get married, have children, build families, a life he would never have. "Why did the gods do this to me?" he whispered to the stars. His parents, who loved him dearly, tried everything. They took him to healers, who gave him bitter herbs and muttered prayers. They visited diviners, who threw cowrie shells and claimed his destiny was yet to be fulfilled. But nothing changed. David remained alone, untouched, unwanted. Years passed. The people of Ajase no longer whispered in secret. They no longer felt pity. Now, they mocked him openly. What is the use of a man who can never be a husband? Even the gods have abandoned him. David is not a real man. Even the young boys, the ones who had once admired him, now saw him as a fool. They giggled when he passed, making rude jokes behind his back. David stopped attending village celebrations. He stopped speaking to the people. He became a shadow, living among them but never truly seen. His parents wept for him, but they could do nothing. The gods have forgotten me, David thought, until one day an old woman arrived in Ajase. She was not like the others. Her back was bent with age, but her eyes burned like fire. She walked with a staff made of sacred wood, and when she spoke, even the wind seemed to listen. Her name was Mama Nika, and she had come for David, a ray of light in the darkness. For days after Mama Nika's visit, David could not stop thinking about her words. "A woman will come," she had said, "one who sees beyond what others see." Was it possible? Could there truly be someone out there who would accept him, love him, despite the curse that had turned him into an outcast? David wanted to believe, but doubt gnawed at his heart. He had spent years watching people turn away from him. Why would this time be any different? But then she arrived. The arrival of Ayomikun. One afternoon, a new family arrived in Ajase. They were traders from the lands of the Yoruba, traveling with their goods in search of a place to settle. The father, a man named Baba Adarimi, was a skilled blacksmith, and the village elders welcomed him warmly. With him came his daughter, a young woman named Ayomikun. She was unlike any woman David had ever seen. Her dark skin glowed like polished bronze, and her eyes held a quiet wisdom. She wore colorful beads around her wrists and a geli wrap high on her head, as was the custom of her people. But what struck David the most was her laughter. It was soft, warm, like the sound of rain touching the earth. While the other villagers whispered behind her back, curious about the stranger in their midst, David kept his distance. He had learned long ago that love was not meant for him. A chance meeting. Days passed, and David continued his quiet life. He avoided the village center, spent his time working in the fields, and spoke only when necessary. But fate had other plans. One evening, as David walked toward the river to fetch water, he saw Ayomikun struggling with a heavy basket. Without thinking, he stepped forward. "Let me help you," he said. She looked up at him, surprised. Most of the villagers ignored David or spoke to him in hushed tones. Yet here he was, offering his help as if they were equals. She hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "Thank you." As David lifted the basket with ease, something changed. For the first time in years, he felt seen. An unlikely friendship. After that day, Ayomikun and David began to see each other more often. She would greet him whenever she passed by, unbothered by the whispers of the village. She asked him questions about Ajase, about its people, its traditions. David found himself talking to her, something he had stopped doing with most people long ago. She told him about her old home, the great Yoruba city of Ife, about the festivals and the stories her grandmother used to tell. He told her about his childhood, the games he played before the village turned against him. For the first time in years, David laughed. But as their friendship grew, so did the suspicions of the villagers. The village whispers again. Why is she always with David? Does she not know what he is? That Yoruba girl must be desperate for a husband. The rumors spread like wildfire. Some people even warned Ayomikun to stay away from him. "You don't know his story," they told her. "He is not a man like the others." But Ayomikun did not listen. Instead, she asked David herself. One evening, as they sat by the river, she turned to him and asked a question he had been dreading. "Why do they talk about you like that?" David hesitated. Should he tell her? Should he let her know the truth that had ruined his life? Finally, he sighed and said, "Because I am cursed." She frowned. "Cursed? How?" His throat tightened, but he forced the words out. "I am different," he said. "No woman has ever accepted me. No one ever will." Ayomikun was silent for a long time. Then, softly, she said something that made his heart stop. "And if I do?" David stared at her. Had he heard her right? Did she mean it? Hope, dangerous, painful hope, began to grow inside him. A dangerous love. Over the next few weeks, Ayomikun and David grew closer than ever. She did not fear him like the others. She did not mock him. She saw him for who he was, a man, not a curse. For the first time in his life, David dared to believe. But the village was watching. The elders were not pleased. "This is unnatural," they said. "A Yoruba woman with a man like him? It cannot be." The whispers turned to warnings. "End this before it is too late. She will regret it. He will ruin her." David tried to push her away, fearing what would happen if she stayed by his side. "They will never accept us," he told her. "You should leave before they turn on you too." But Ayomikun refused. "Let them talk," she said. "They do not decide my heart." David wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that love could overcome everything. But deep down he knew the truth. The gods had never allowed him happiness before. Why would they start now? David and Ayomikun continued to see each other in secret. They met by the river at dusk, when the village was busy preparing for the night. They walked through the forest paths, hidden from judging eyes. For the first time in his life, David felt alive. Ayomikun loved him, truly loved him, not for what he was, but for who he was. She didn't see a curse. She saw a man. But Ajase was watching. The whispers grew louder. Suspicion turned to anger. "She is playing with spirits," some said. "This is unnatural," others cried. The village elders summoned Baba Adarimi, Ayomikun's father. "Your daughter dishonors your family," they told him. "She must leave David at once." Baba Adarimi, a proud Yoruba man, was furious. "This is not our way," he thundered. "No daughter of mine will marry a cursed man." That night, Ayomikun's father forbade her from seeing David again. "You will marry a good Yoruba man, not an outcast," he ordered. But Ayomikun refused. "I love him," she said, standing tall. Her father raised his hand to strike her, but she did not flinch. "Then you are no longer my daughter," he spat. Ayomikun was disowned. With nowhere else to go, she ran to David, tears streaming down her face. "I have lost my family," she whispered. David held her close. "You have me." Their love was no longer a secret. Ajase was enraged. "She has chosen a cursed man over her own people. The gods will punish them both." David and Ayomikun became outcast together. No one would sell to them at the market. No one would speak to them. Even David's own parents turned away, too afraid to defy the village. "I told you, son," his father said. "The gods have abandoned you. Nothing good will come of this." David and Ayomikun were truly alone, but they still had each other. And so, despite the world standing against them, they decided to leave Ajase forever. "We will start a new life," Ayomikun said. "Somewhere far away, where no one knows us. A place where we can be free." David wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that happiness was still possible. But fate had other plans. On the night before their escape, David and Ayomikun met by the river one last time. The moonlight shone on her face, making her even more beautiful. "After tomorrow, it will just be us," she whispered, leaning into him. For the first time, David allowed himself to hope. They kissed under the stars, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. But then, a scream. Ayomikun cried out in pain, her body jerking away from David's. At first, he didn't understand. Then he saw the arrow sticking out of her back. His breath stopped. She fell into his arms, blood staining the riverbank. "No, no!" David screamed. He looked up and saw the hunters of Ajase standing at the edge of the trees. His own people. "She was never meant to be yours," one of them said, lowering his bow. David felt his heart shatter. Ayomikun's fingers trembled as they touched his face. "I love you," she whispered. And then she was gone. David's world turned red. He roared in agony, lunging at the men who had stolen his only love. But there were too many of them. They beat him to the ground, kicked him, spat on him. "A cursed man does not deserve love," they said. By sunrise, David was dragged through the village, his hands tied behind his back. The people of Ajase gathered to watch his punishment. "What should we do with him?" the elders asked. Some called for banishment. Others called for death. David, bruised and broken, did not care anymore. His world had already ended. Without Ayomikun, he had nothing left to live for. But the village was not finished with him. As the sun reached its peak, the elders made their decision. "Take him to the river," they said. "Let the gods decide his fate." Bound and beaten, David was dragged back to the place where Ayomikun had died. The river was red with her blood. "If the gods have mercy, they will save him," the elders declared. "If not, let the waters take him." With one final push, they threw him into the river. The water was cold. David did not fight. He let himself sink, deeper, deeper, until the world faded away. And so, the boy who had been born strong, the man who had carried a burden too great for one soul, was no more. The river carried him away, and the village of Ajase never spoke his name again. But on quiet nights, when the wind blew softly through the trees, some say you could still hear his voice in the distance, calling for the woman he lost, calling for Ayomikun, and the river, forever stained with their tragedy, whispered back,